Well, basketball superstar Liz Cambage has sure proved it to me after this video that's just come out. She is a poster child for the new anti-racism movement, and I don't mean that in a good way. In fact, it says it here in a flattering New York Times profile 3 weeks ago. She has spoken loudly about racial issues. But what the New York Times has not said for some reason is what exactly Cambage has said so loudly about race. It does not say a single word, for instance, about why she has not played for the Australian team for quite a while now and why she's not welcome back. But the truth is that Cambage has been exposed as another race-hustling hypocrite, someone who uses race politics not to fight racism, but exploit it, not to fight for a principle, but for a race-based advantage. Now, on Sunday, News Corp papers in Australia finally revealed what it was that Cambage told Nigerian players in a notorious warm-up game against Nigeria before the Tokyo Olympics, in a confrontation that saw her leave the team. Now, it all started with a nasty on-court kerfuffle, and we now have the video. It shows Cambage being hard-tagged there in the centre. She's the tallest woman in white, with Cambage then delivering a wild elbow to the head and neck of a Nigerian player who suffered a cut in the fracas. Now, two Nigerian players reportedly told the News Corp reported, that Cambage called them monkeys. She also told the team to go back to their third world country before apologising the next day and quitting the Australian team for supposed mental health reasons. But really, monkeys? Can you get any more racist? Now, Cambage on Monday denied this report. She posted a statement online saying the incident that took place at the pre-Olympic scrimmage with the Nigerian national team was handled privately almost a year ago. I'm very disappointed and hurt by the events and accusations that have unfolded in the Australian media. The account of what took place is inaccurate and misleading. I did not use the racial slur towards the Nigerian team that's been circulating. Well, she also said she did not actually use violence, and you've seen the tape. So, either the reported comments of the two Nigerian players are false, or Liz Cambage's denials, they're false. You take your pick. But you see, for me, what counts against Cambage, in my opinion, is her history of, how did the New York Times put it? Speaking loudly about race. And I suspect I'm not alone in thinking, wait a minute, Liz, with these denials. You see, I've heard absolutely nobody say, boy, I'm so surprised that Cambage called Nigerian players monkeys. And I've heard none of her former teammates in the Australian team say, hey, this is not the Liz that we know. And nor, by the way, has anyone sounded surprised that Basketball Australia refused to say what Cambage called the Nigerians, or that she elbowed one in the head in a warm-up before last year's Tokyo Olympics. All that was covered up. And I think many people do now kind of expect a double standard, that a player of colour will be protected like that in a way that a white player would not if they had used such language. No, the news of Cambage's alleged tirade comes as zero surprise, because we know the anti-racism movement has become a con. I mean, how often do you now see people use anti-racism not to fight for a principle, but for a grubby racial advantage? Things have so changed from the days when being anti-racist and colourblind was a noble thing, a thing of principle. A principle that was perfectly put by the great Martin Luther King 55 years ago.
I have a dream. My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream.
You no longer hear race hustlers today express that ideal. Hey, let's all be colourblind. It's in fact the very reverse. I've even seen some treatises now saying that to be colourblind is to be racist. Today's race hustlers in fact insist that we do judge by colour, and not to end racism, but to exploit it. And to me, Cambage is merely one example. Here's someone who's a Nigerian father and a white Australian mother, a mother who's been a successful executive, who sent her daughter to private schools on the Mornington Peninsula, which is a lovely area south of Melbourne. Yet Cambage now acts and even talks as if she'd been dragged backwards through Harlem ghetto, using anti-racism as a weapon and a sort of look-at-me strategy. For instance, she notoriously threatened to boycott the Tokyo Olympics because one team photo distributed by the Australian Olympic Committee had supposedly too many white athletes. And she complained, how am I meant to represent a country that doesn't even represent me? And let's not forget, again, Cambage was actually raised by her white mother. Cambage then upped her race hustling. When Tom Maher, as Australia's most successful women's basketball coach, he called Cambage's threatened boycott inappropriate. She straight out attacked his race. I do not care for a white man's opinion on racial issues. And when Cambage saw another team photograph featuring Maurice Longbottom, who identifies as Indigenous, Cambage again played the colour game. Also, fake tan doesn't equal diversity. Fake tan? Well, look, later she said, oh, well, look, what I really meant was the other players. I didn't mean Longbottom. No, the other players. Yeah, sure. And then to top it off, this private school educated woman played at being some kind of Harlem black talker, doing what the New York Times would call cultural appropriation, typing, until I see y'all doing more, Australian Olympic team, I'm going to sit this one out. Now, this is not the kind of anti-racism that Martin Luther King was talking about. You know, in fact, if we judge Cambage by her character and not her skin, I doubt she'd be getting flattering write-ups in the New York Times or in the Los Angeles Times as the sort of wonder face down there of the LA Sparks. Nor would she be so instantly forgiven by her coach for this alleged racist slur that could well have finished the career of a white player. Now, it seems that playing the race card now does bring you protection and often advantage. I mean, you just ask leading Democrat Senator Elizabeth Warren, who for many years claimed to be of an American Indian descent, which sure helped her academic career, before finally admitting to Americans she really wasn't that Indian after all. But in Australia too, Cambage is just the type. She's not an exception. In fact, Australia has its own Elizabeth Warrens. Take politician Bob Katter. He's the grandson of a Lebanese immigrant, but to the surprise of many, is now claiming to be Aboriginal, despite having absolutely no known Aboriginal ancestry. He's claiming to be the victim of whites and white racism.
I identify as a black fella on odd occasions, and I'll identify this time as a black fella. I come from Cloncurry and I'm dark. I'm one of the curry mob, you know. And we made a hell of a bad mistake 250 years ago letting you white fellas in. You won't give my mob the right to own a piece of land. Why would you refuse a person because he's black living in a black community the right to own a piece of land? And everyone on earth has a bear. If we have a bear, we black fellas, we then can't, we get a criminal charge.
I should point out that Bob Katter actually has many Aboriginal voters in his electorate, if you were wondering what was going on. Being Aboriginal might actually help him there. Then there's perhaps Australia's most famous living Aborigine today, Bruce Pascoe, a speaker at many writers' festivals, now a professor of Indigenous agriculture, the best-selling author of Dark Emu, which is being taught in our schools, supposedly about Aboriginal history. I mean, there's a bit of fakery there, but anyway, let's overlook that. This is an Aboriginal man, we're told, promoted by Australia's national broadcaster. He claims he's a member of no fewer than 3 Aboriginal tribes.
My name is Bruce Pascoe and I'm Bunurong, Panalapana and Yuin.
But this famous Aborigine said 3 years ago he only fully identified as Koori, or Aboriginal, only when he was about 40, which suggests around 1987, maybe 1988, which is a fascinating coincidence because it was in 1988 that an article reviewing his novel Fox about a fugitive searching for his Aboriginal roots complained that here was Pascoe imagining the psyche of an Aboriginal person, and it's not possible for him to convey all that concept of my people would mean to, say, Colin Johnson. Johnson was Australia's first best-selling Aboriginal author, until we all found out he wasn't Aboriginal either. The reviewer said that Pascoe writes as a humane, informed Liberal, but as a white man as well. So, review saying this book would have been better if Pascoe wasn't white. Because when you look at the cover, the flyleaf, Pascoe doesn't identify as Aboriginal then. Well, funnily enough, since calling himself Aboriginal, Pascoe has never looked back, even though genealogical records confirm he is 100% of English descent, and 2 Aboriginal organisations representing his supposed tribes call him a fake. Now, Pascoe himself, it's true, does not pose as the victim of racism, just as a member of a race he says was oppressed by whites. And of course that gives him tremendous moral stature, among other much more tangible advantages. But this new anti-racism racism is actually more serious than some grifters using it to get ahead. Now, for a man who is arguably our most famous and influential living Aborigine, is actually a white man, if he's profiting by shouting how Aboriginal he is, how can we blame Cambage for playing the race card herself? But don't be confused about what's going on here. The fight against racism has been totally destroyed now. What we're seeing is what I describe as the racism of the anti-racists. It's not racism we normally think of it, not racism by fighting racism, Martin Luther King, his style. It's not fighting for a world blind to colour and race. Not at all. This is people putting their tribe above another tribe. This is racism at work. This is what I call racism now, the racism of the left. People creating a new racial fight for power. It is about power. It's not about principle at all.